Hi everyone, it's Natalie here, and I wanted to, let's see, today is January the 2nd, and so yesterday, the 1st of January, was the end of Kwanzaa. And this year I decided I really wanted to understand Kwanzaa better. I've encountered with the principles of Kwanzaa before, um, and I was somewhat familiar with them, but I really didn't know very much about it. And I really was curious. I was deeply, deeply curious. And after Natalia from Ouroboros put out the videos about what our council, what was in our Council of Seven, Queen Osset had put out her video, and she had done hers Black Panther style, which I really loved. I thought that was really cool. And one of the decks that she mentioned as being in her Council of Seven is the Orisha Tarot. And she mentioned very specifically in that video that, if you want to know more about the Orisha traditions that come from West Africa, without being initiated into them, that this was a really, really good method of learning about it. So I felt like that was kind of a nice invitation, like how to learn more about that tradition, which is one that I've been very curious about for a very long time. I remember, in fact, I watched a video, like a documentary about a community in, I want to say maybe South Carolina, that practices in, I don't remember exactly whether they called it voodoo or vodou. It was definitely a West African Orisha tradition. And it was the first time I'd ever really seen a serious documentary that was approaching the religion with tremendous respect. And it was, I believe, made by a white filmmaker. I really wish I could remember the name of the documentary so that I could recommend it. I've looked for it multiple times in the last year or two, and I haven't been able to locate it again. I'm going to continue looking for it because it's one that I'd really like to watch again. I feel like I probably watched it back in 2012. At any rate, it was beautiful. The practitioners were so sincere and genuine and humble. And rather than making it something creepy and weird and inaccessible, through the making strange of that religion and its practices, it made it very accessible. It made it poetic, beautiful. It became very easy to see where the overlaps were between that tradition, say, and the one I was practicing so devoutly at the time, which is, Korean-based Zen Buddhism. And it's never left me, after having watched that, and the curiosity, a very sincere curiosity and mutual, simultaneous respect, I guess is the word I want. Simultaneous, very, deep respect for the power of it, really kind of meant that it's taken a while to kind of go back or go further, to go further. So, after watching her video, I thought, wow, this is something I definitely want to investigate and look at. And I went ahead and ordered a copy of the Orisha Tarot, with the intention of using it and getting to know the deck and work with it through Kwanzaa. Because I remembered that last year, and I'd watched the videos themselves ages ago, when I was binge watching all of Queen Osset's videos at one point, I guess back in March or in the spring, and kind of just getting a sense of who she was and what her channel was about. And I found them fascinating. And I remembered that she had done all of those tarot spreads for each of the days of Kwanzaa. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll go ahead and get the Orisha Tarot and use it as a way of understanding Kwanzaa better through doing the spreads, and simultaneously learn about a culture that I'm curious about, and would like to know more about. So that's where it came from. So that said, this is the box. And I will do just a really simple walkthrough of the deck, not today, but in another video, so that people who just want to see the deck, will be able to just see the deck. When you open the box, it's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, I feel like this is honestly maybe one of the most underrated decks that I've come across in a very long time. I don't know if it's that people feel like this is unwelcoming, or that the tradition is unwelcoming, but I'm, as a, as a non, a non Orisha initiated individual who practices in a completely different tradition and religion, I gotta say, I've never felt so welcomed. I've never felt like this was a more accessible, a more beautiful deck to work with. It's a very powerful deck and in a wonderful way. So we have this gorgeous box, very nice magnetic, Llewellyn box. It comes with this gorgeous guidebook as well. And I just want to riff on the gorgeousness of this guidebook for a minute. Folks, if you're not into guidebooks, can I please make a plea with you to try? I get that everybody has their intuitive way of wanting to get to know a deck, but especially with this deck, you really need the guidebook. The meanings do follow very much a Rider-Waite-Smith based interpretation, but the imagery is nothing like the, it could be very confusing and it could lead to a lot of misunderstanding. So each of the pages has the card, full color, gorgeous full color image, and then, when you turn the page and you get all, there's tons of information and, oh, whoops, wrong way. Wrong way, sorry. You get all this gorgeous information. Frequently, let's see, there's another example where nope, it's not that one. Sometimes where maybe it's only in the minors. Yeah, in the minors, frequently you have the image on this page. You've got the information, and then when you turn the page, you have like this. You still have the imagery on the next page along with the rest of the info. So it was a great way to work with the book. I did mark the pages according to Kwanzaa. So day 1 is the black candle, so I used black markers. Day 2 was a red candle. This should not show in the way. This was to mark something different in the book, information that I wanted. Day 3, and so on and so forth, all the way through to day 7. Okay, and this way I could keep track of the cards that came up in each of the readings as I'm going back through. It made it easy to track, like, what were the ones that came up more than once, and on which days did they show up, and so forth. So yeah, the book is extremely well written. Andrew McGregor, who is the author of the deck, he created the imagery, and he also created and wrote the book, and he's wonderful. So Andrew McGregor is actually a white North American practitioner, practicing in this tradition. And I believe what he writes about it, and I really hope sincerely that I'm pronouncing this correctly. There's an accent on the I at the end of this word, so Lukumi, practitioner. So this is, he's very reverent and very capable in writing this, of acknowledging acknowledging his background. There is no attempt anywhere in here of jumping over the fact or leaping over the fact that, the slave trade is the reason why North Americans and white people at all have access to this tradition and its wisdom. So he's very honest and very reverent about that. in here. He also clarifies for the reader, whether, how to think about the Orisha, how to understand them. So he has a section in here where he says, it's called Spirits, People, or Both. And he says there are many ways to think about the stories and mythology of the Orisha. Some stories are theological or religious elements that speak to the aspects of creation or the nature of the spirit in an archetypal kind of way. Other stories are likely the product of a priest in a particular Orisha encountering a problem and dealing with it. In the second kind of story, the incident became part of the Orisha's stories. It's so similar to the way that Buddhism is dealt with. There were so many different overlaps here for me in terms of looking at different Buddhist traditions and the way that those have evolved. And that was one of them, which I found fascinating. There are a lot of Buddha's life stories that we don't have any evidence for. It's not in scripture anywhere and is very likely a teaching story. I mean, it's filled with those. Buddhism is filled with teaching stories that have no basis in anything other than probably a teacher's imagination, but which carry the truth of Dharma, right? And that's what I got from this, is that there are many of these stories which feel completely in harmony with a particular Orisha. And so the story was kept as part of that Orisha story. Let's see. He says, in making art for this deck, it felt important to explore where we were encountering an Orisha that was acting as a spirit or that was acting as an avatar of that spirit on Earth, which is beautiful. And the way that that is clarified throughout the deck is fantastic. He also talks about politics. So he says, why are there politics in this book? And his answer is wonderful. So here's where he really is very clear about it. He says, in writing the material for this book and creating the deck, I have included elements that highlight the politics within the Orisha communities. I think these complicated histories and current challenges are important to try to understand. Many stories double as a historical documentation of politics and power shifts, as we see in the Chariot card. Others, like the Moon, Lovers, and Hierophant, speak to the challenges that gender and patriarchal power play in the Orisha religions, which is also very interesting. Beyond history, our divination speaks to everything that is in the world and beyond. In this way, it must include conversations about feminism, power, race, class, and more. I consider myself a political person. In making this deck, I felt it was important to respect what I see as the legacy of historical problems. It cannot be denied that without the Atlantic slave trade, I would not likely be practicing this religion. As I am aware of my power in this project, I have taken steps to make sure I am not replaying cultural mistakes of the past. I spent time with several people of color when making this art to discuss the choices of representation made throughout this deck. I have also worked to include people in the art that represent a spectrum of the people I know. Finally, I have long had a policy of writing using gender-neutral terms. In writing this book about a system that is very codified in gender, I chose to use gendered language only where it represents a specific gendered aspect of an Orisha. Let's see. So there are certain Orishas that are always female or male, and so those remain male or female within. And then he says, where I talk about people in general, I have used a gender-neutral pronoun, they or them. So it's beautifully done. It's beautifully, beautifully done. So a lot of the cards in the deck are, hold imagery that is not immediate for us, right? If we're not initiated into this tradition in some way, right? So there's no familiarity or we don't understand it. I feel this is an important thing to talk about because this is clearly, a religion and a tradition that is demonized a lot. And the truth is that we have more in common with its aspect or with aspects of it than we would realize. This, for example, is Temperance. You need to understand why there is sort of a ghost person underneath the ground. There's sort of an underneath happening there. The story of this card I loved because it's just heartbreaking and beautiful, and it's perfect as an illustration of the Five of Swords. And then this character, this mask initially, and in fact this Fool card, I realized was kind of off-putting to me initially because I find that mask unsettling on some level. As I read the book and spent more time with this particular Orisha, who is called Elegua, he's enchanting, and really, very kind of funny. Like there's a sense of humor in this Orisha that comes through in the deck. For example, here we have the Ten of Cups, and the way that he describes it is that we have Elegua underneath the table, whispering and telling, whispering secrets and telling the person things under the table, kind of quietly and off to the side. It's beautiful. It's just beautiful. The stories are beautiful. For example, with this Eight of Swords card, this story is about a competition. And I'm going to see if I can just summarize it because I could read all of these cards over. I could read the stories are so beautiful. And the patakis of the Orisha, the patakis are so, there's so much depth in them. As teaching stories, they're immediately humbling. Let's see. This card is often one of gossip, jealousy, rumor, and others' interference in our lives. Okay. So this character is the Orisha Shango, and this is a cow's tongue. Okay. And what the story is, in short, was that there was a competition where each of the Orishas, it was a contest, each of the Orishas was going to bring something to the creator that would show the creator what the best thing was about the world. So people brought everything that they could think of. And when it says here, when it was Shango's turn, he presented the creator with a cow's tongue on a plate. All right. And so the creator asked him to explain himself, and he said, the tongue is the most wonderful thing, because with it we can tell those who we hold in our heart that we love them. We can express our pride for our children and our gratitude to our friends and parents. Okay. And so moved by this, the creator announced Shango as the winner. Okay. But then the next day, the creator, whose name I did not learn to pronounce, so I won't, proposed the same contest in reverse. Whoever brought the worst thing in creation would win that day's prize. Okay, so others brought weapons, alcohol, poison, rotting things, etc. Things that are horrible. Again, I love this. It's brilliant. Shango brought a tongue. When asked to explain, he answered, "It is with our tongue that we lie, slander, and cheat those around us. This is how we bring hate into the world and curse our enemies." Moved by his wisdom, the creator declared Shango the winner again. I love that so much. And, this particular story reminds me so much about a lot of Zen stories and Buddhist teaching stories that I've heard. And, on the outset, to see a cow's tongue depicted like this, it's off-putting, right? As Western white people, that's somehow threatening, I think. And yet, the meaning of this card is so beautiful. It's so wise. There's so much depth to it. This is a story that, it's about right speech. In Buddhism, we would call it's right speech as a Dharma story. So he goes through on the next page all of the symbolism So, he tells you what all of that symbolism would mean and what it is. Then he tells you how to use this with divining. So for divination, what and how a person speaks are, as if they are tremendously important to their success or failure. If they are bitter, jealous, or complain, they will not find happiness. If they are honest, loving, and optimistic, they will find success much more easily. Etc. And then solutions, right? If you're solving a problem and you're reading for yourself, don't lie. Wear a charm against jealousy and gossip. Get a charm called the eye and tongue to protect your house. So, these are the solutions are obvious and accessible to both individuals of this tradition and to the outsider. And as the outsider, I'm learning so much about what happens in that particular tradition. And I find that utterly valuable. I love understanding. I love learning about other people and how they see the world, and it's humbling. It's deeply humbling. What else? This one was heartbreaking. The Five of, do we want to, let's talk about the Five of Cups. This one really got me the other day. I cannot remember the spread that it came up in. Maybe another video for another time, just to kind of process some of what came up or not. Maybe I'm the only one that's interested in that. It was a gift to read with this deck for 5 days, and I find I miss it. I'm on one day without it, and I'm like, oh, I feel like I made new friends. I feel like I made these new friends, and we did such deep work together, and now I'm not picking them up to play with them first thing in the morning, and have that dialogue. So I will be finding ways to continue my work with this deck, I believe, and I didn't know, when I picked it up and I started, I didn't know. And I find I'm really moved to want to continue to work with it, talk to it, understand, get to know, all of it. So with this Five of Cups, which the story I just found heartbreaking. I don't know where to put it. I'm like cover my face with it. Ta-da! Here we go. Let's see. So this woman was Shango's lover. However, she discovered that he had been seeing Oshun on the side. She was overcome with jealousy, and she went to ask Oshun what she had. That this person whose name I have not figured out how to pronounce yet. There are some of these people and individuals that I really made sure I knew. There are a lot of unfamiliar names in here, and I don't want to do the disrespect of not knowing and pronouncing incorrectly. It's already disrespectful that I don't know the pronunciation, but I won't further the insult by not knowing and then trying, right? And being wrong. Let's see. So Oshun offered to teach her the magic that she had used to sway Shango. She told the woman to cut off her ear, thinking more would be better, and put it in his food to bind him to her forever. So the woman ran home and she prepared Shango's favorite food. She cut off a piece of her ear and added it to the okra stew that she had made him. When he arrived home and saw what she had done, he was so disgusted, he left and never returned. That is such a powerful, powerful story about the Five of Cups, that it feels completely in harmony with its real meaning. And yet without the pataki to illuminate the symbolism used here, it would make no sense. It would make no sense. And yet with the pataki, it's absolutely beautiful. And I just found that it went right in. It was heartbreaking. And finally, how bad is the time here? It's not the worst. I've been worse than that. But I'm going to keep going because I love this and I want to share it so much. Let's see. There was one story about Temperance that really was very heartbreaking as well. And I had that one on day 6, apparently. So here is what Andrew McGregor says about Temperance. He says, here we meet our guardian angel, that being who was sent to watch over us for the whole of our lives. This card speaks of divine guidance. Often it shows an angel pouring water from one vessel to another, indicating balance, harmony, and interconnectedness. So he does that a lot in the guidebook. He'll tell you what the usual, he'll talk specifically and speak to, what we're accustomed to seeing in the card. And then we'll go through and offer why that change happened. And what the pataki is behind, the teaching story, we would say in Buddhism, is behind the visual choice and the symbolism. So here he says, it's believed by Orisha followers that we all have an ori. We don't have a clear translation in English for this idea, as it combines notions we usually separate. Our ori is our personal Orisha, often called our celestial double, which guides and watches over us during our life. The ori is also tied to the idea of destiny. As we'll see in the Ten of Cups, we choose an ori before incarnating, and our choice defines the qualities and experience we will have in this lifetime. The ori is also tied to the idea of our head and our thoughts. So if any of you follow shamanic Arawak princess, I've heard her refer to this many times before. But this was the first time I had a better understanding of what it was that she was talking about, right? It is perhaps best to think, this is why also covering the head is very important in this tradition, right? The ori is also tied to our head, to the idea of our head and thoughts. It is perhaps best to think of it as part of ourself that knows why we are here, resides in the spirit world, and is in contact with us at all times. So it makes sense why, if that particular spirit lives, hair in the face, lives in the head and ideas and thought, and it is part of us, it's part of who we are, it holds our wisdom, you would want to protect, right? You protect it at all costs from anything happening to it, right? Before the coming of missionaries, the belief was that Orun, or heaven, was in the earth. The dead were buried there, often in the dirt, under the houses in which their families lived. The blessing of food grew from the earth. It is said that a missionary gave a cross to an Orisha worshiper, extolling its great significance and spiritual value. Then, to the horror of the missionaries, this person proceeded to bury it in the earth for safekeeping. The missionaries responded by beating the person, telling them that heaven was in the sky. When I read that, again, it's deeply humbling. That I will never separate that pataki from this image. And think about the ways in which simple misunderstanding and ignorance about someone else's beliefs or ideas can lead to something so violent. Violence comes from ignorance. More often than not, evil comes from ignorance as well. When we don't know, when something's strange, when it's not what we're accustomed to, it's so easy to dismiss it or to misinterpret it or misunderstand it and think of it as bad. Okay? But when you understand or have a way in, the person in this story was offering the very best. Someone gave them a precious gift, and they offered the very best that they had directly to, their spirits, their gods. They put it on the altar. And yet, because Christian, and Western, traditions are kind of, we have our way of doing things too, but because it wasn't the same, there's an immediate misunderstanding, because in Western tradition, we think of hell as being below the earth. And yet those of us who garden, those of us who are tied to the earth, I mean, I'm speaking to the choir here, I think, because I think the vast majority of the people who watch my channel are actually pagans. But, you know, you get it, right? You get it immediately. What's below the ground is precious, is deeply precious. But it's precious in a different way coming from a Western tradition than it is coming from an Orisha tradition. So you know, that will stay. It's heartbreaking. It's beautiful and it's heartbreaking. And the understanding of this, you know, spirit walking along with us in the heaven below our feet, it kind of changes the way I think about walking. When I think about walking mindfully, what am I walking on? What walks with me? What walks beside me? What walks beneath me? It gives food for thought. It gives food for thought. You know, the ways that we think that we know stuff is not really, it's not the only truth and it's not the only reality. So that is the cards. That is the book. The cardstock, those of you who are cardstock snobs, don't be put off, okay? Initially, you may be put off. They're slightly glossy, and they do feel a little bit thin. But let me show you how they shuffle. This is one of the dreamiest decks I have ever shuffled, hands down. Watch this. It is like butter. If you're a riffle shuffler and a bridger, if you have any kind of arthritis or tired hands, this deck is a delight to shuffle. It's absolutely gorgeous. And in fact, there's the artwork that comes from the inside of the box. And it is the Ace of Discs. Discs. It's discs in this deck. Yeah. And this one is the Ace of Wands. Yeah. So that, my friends, is the Orisha Tarot. It's beautiful. It's really, really beautiful. I don't feel, I mean, I doubt very strongly that I'm going, unless things change, and I don't know. I mean, things in life always do. I doubt very strongly that I will ever become an initiate within this tradition. However, I've derived tremendous value from it. And I feel closer to who and what the Orishas are. I feel a sense of value of who and what they are that I did not have previously. And I intend to continue working with the deck, working with the tradition, just as an outsider, just to know more. Because I believe strongly that if people understood better, there would be a greater ability to appreciate the beauty inherent in this tradition that we don't have access to. You know, this image, for example, you know, we have this image of chickens and chickens being sacrificed and plucked. Very little is known, right, about this particular practice, what is involved, why it would be on the page of discs, right? There's a lot here. And then there's also just the beauty of the artwork, folks. The artwork, gosh, look at that. I mean, honestly, the artwork is some of the best. I really love it. It's some of the best artwork I've seen in a deck in a long time in terms of my own personal taste. It has the simplicity of like folk art, and yet it's got the complexity of layers and layering of images and symbols. I love the way that he has, I'm just going to turn the light down on the screen. I love the way that he has worked the names of the cards into the image so that they're integrated. It's just beautiful. And it is very diverse. You know, it is a very, very diverse deck. And believe it or not, we tend to think of this as an African tradition, and thereby only practiced by those who are of African descent. But it is actually inclusive of all races, all backgrounds. This one has a beautiful story. Oh my gosh, wonderful story behind the Five of Swords, or Five of Wands. Yeah, it's really stunning. Love this King of Cups. Justice. And again, the Fool as Elegua does not upset me anymore. I find the image kind of charming, actually. Now that I know more about Elegua, it's wonderful. Yeah. Yeah. So beautiful. So yeah. The Orisha Tarot, everybody, check it out. It's really, again, I think one of the most underrated tarot decks I've come across in a long time. Mass market, it's very inexpensive. It's very readily available. So with that, I'm going to get some water and clear my throat. All right, everybody, take care. Much love to all of you, and thank you so much. Bye-bye.